So in module 3, what we're going to do today is just cover some essentials and then clear the class a little early to give students a chance to finish up the last assignment and the assessment in module 2. But module 2, we focused on hardware, on software, and on services. In module 3, we're focusing on users, identity, and access management, right? And access management, identity and access management is sometimes called IAM. And so this is really where a lot of system security is lacking. If this one component of system security was handled well, in most cases, there would be much less exposure on a system or a device, and there would be fewer opportunities for malicious agents or hackers to gain access. And so this is one module we want to spend some quality time on, right? One of the topics that we're going to cover is how far we have strayed from a sensible approach to device and system data security, right? One of the paradoxes of our technical universe is that we want it all to work so badly that we pull a lot of the safeties off, sensible safeties, right? And we'll give some examples of that. We want you to be able to identify components in a device or a system that are designed to authenticate someone's identity. So authentication and identity go hand in glove. Authentication is verification of identity. And then once an individual is identified and you've verified that what you have in that system is the authorized user, right? Then there are access control issues. Now, encryption is a fail-safe when there's exposure to unauthorized users, right? So we are gonna basically engage some aspects of encryption too. So this is actually what I consider to be one of the coolest parts of our course as a whole. We get a chance to introduce the concepts that you're going to find in many mid-sized to larger organizations. And it's how many of the access control and authentication methods are framed. So there are 3 most common methods used to ensure data security, but there are some caveats, right? And that's one of the first things that we'll tackle in the module. And then we want to return to this idea of a local security account management model, or what we call a work group model, and the domain or enterprise model. In this module, you'll have access to your own system in a domain enterprise. So that's one of the cool, again, one of the cool aspects of the course is that in this one module, we're going to take things up to a whole different level, and you'll be operating as if you were a part of a government agency or a Fortune 500 company. You'll have access to your own server and it'll belong to you, but it's part of an enterprise or Active Directory environment. There are some very underutilized but simple methods that greatly improve data security. And these are things from industry practice that we're going to bring here. So these first 3 student learning objectives we've talked about are not so much in your book, but more so from industry standards. If you become certified as a sysadmin or help desk support, or CompTIA A+ or Security Plus, those are the kinds of things that you'll see in the mix. Now, from the textbook, we're also going to review some of the content, and again, it's all focused on the file system objects after authentication and identity is verified. So essentially, let's go into this. Whoop. Where is there is a study guide. I'll need to make sure the study guide is in there. Hang on a second. Can everyone see my screen again?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we return to this idea that you can't really have an exploit unless there's exposure. And when it is accessible to anyone, that's part of the problem. If no thought is given about this, then most often anyone can access your data. So let's take a simple case where I have a disk drive, and let's create a directory called company data. Okay. Would anyone care to guess what the default permissions are for this newly created directory?
It'd be admin.
Say again?
Would it just be like standard?
Well, let's look at the properties. And if you go into security, what you'll find on any Windows system is that administrators can do anything. That's understandable. The system can do anything. But by default, when you just create a new directory for data, in Windows, they just want things to work. And essentially, users can read and execute. They can list the contents, and they can read. So they can inspect the contents of data files, and if there's a program or software, they can execute it. They can look at it, they can see it, and they can browse the contents, right? And that's what any user can do. Now, a user in this context is defined as any agent or individual that connects with this machine, right? Now, that's not an authenticated user. That's just somebody who's connected to your system, somebody that has access to your system. Now, when you think about that, if somebody is connected or has access to your system and they have read and execute privileges to applications, they can browse folder or directory contents, right? They can go into other subdirectories and so on, and they can read the data files. I mean, yeah, if you install new software and it wants to perform operations of one sort or another, you want to be able to process data or work with documents. Basically, anybody who's connected to that system or on that system, if they're a user, right? That's what they can do. Now, what if they're authenticated? What if they have logged in just as a standard user? Look at the defaults here. And I just want you to understand, if someone has logged in to this computer with a proper user account and then they authenticate, they enter a password and they prove who they are so that the identity of the user is known on that system, they can modify the contents of this directory by default. Now, notice the difference. This is an individual who has not verified their identity. They're just connected. They're on the system. This is a user who has verified their identity. Okay? So they've authenticated successfully. They're allowed to change things. They're allowed to write changes to data files. Now, when you think about it, that's not too cool. To understand why this is happening, you have to go to the advanced options. And what you find out is that this directory I just created is inheriting the default permissions that were established on the root of this drive. On the root of the disk drive, the Windows operating system says, okay, administrators have full control. The system itself has full control. Authenticated users can modify this folder, subfolders, and files. So if company data had, all sorts of information in there for each company division, and then for each company within each division, each department, right? The subfolders or subdirectories for each of the divisions and departments, and then what? Individual staff members, right? All those files for that company data, just any properly logged on user can change anything, right? Again, Microsoft wanted everything to work. So whenever you create a new directory, it says, okay, where am I? I'm at the root of the D drive. I'm sitting on the D drive. And in order for things to work on any disk drive where people can just store what they need and access what they need and change what they need, let's keep it simple. So inheritance, those settings are inherited from the D drive. And that's what we start off with. This is terrible. I mean, this is absolutely terrible. In Linux, it's simpler. If you create a new directory in Linux, the permissions are not in place whatsoever for anyone else, whether they're part of a group or it's anyone else in the universe. They don't have permissions by default. And that's why, well, that's why Linux is limited in its popularity. Oftentimes when you create a new directory using Ubuntu or Kali or one of those favorite flavors of Linux, what happens is that a new directory, you can't get in. If you're someone else on the system, those other individuals cannot get in there. And if you're not someone else on the system, but you're connected to and on the system, you can't do it either. So those two distinctions between groups of users, hey, I'm local and I'm authentic, right? I'm part of the organization. I'm part of the group that's supposed to use this, right? Neither those individuals nor the rest of the world have open access where they can just do this, right? And this is a serious challenge, and it's one of the reasons why access control should be an intentional process. If you understand from the beginning that default access control in any Windows system is too exposed, profoundly exposed. And you begin to realize that I should set up some basic roles for users, and I should define access for those users. That's half the battle. It's a different mindset. It's actually the seeds of a different culture. When we talk about culture, this particular culture is devoted to making Microsoft products, operating systems, whether it's Windows 10 or 11 or it's Windows Server. Microsoft wants anyone who buys their product to use their product without too much difficulty. It's all about ease of use. And that's why they've designed their operating system in this manner. The thing that I want you to understand is that what you should do is make some changes. Like, let's say that somebody's authenticated on that system, and that means they're allowed or they have the rights to be on that system because there's a user account that they can work with as a logon. And I mean, that's what we're talking about here. An authenticated user is somebody who is authorized and you've validated their identity, right? So they're allowed on the system, but do you want them to be able to modify everything? As a general rule, if they're just somebody who's allowed to use the system and access the data, do you want them to be able to change anything they see or touch by default? Is that a sensible thing?
Nope.
It's not. What about users who are not authorized to be on the system? They're just connected to, or they're on the system, right? Somebody figured out a way to get on that screen. They're connected to it. Well, how do they do that? Well, in a Windows environment, if NetBIOS is turned on, all you have to do is click on network. And as soon as you click on network, then the connected devices and systems in your network start to show in this window, right? And that's freakish. I mean, when most people don't even think about clicking on network, but you should do that in your own environment and see what happens. In fact, it would almost be fun to stop sharing. Why don't we do that in a minute? We'll stop sharing and we'll ask somebody to share their screen, open File Explorer and click on network. And unless you've disabled NetBIOS as a general habit, as a general practice, everybody in your local neighborhood can be seen and touched on that network. Regardless, if you want to change this, you create a new, what we're saying is that it's a good practice. No, it's a best practice to intentionally define the security as a device, an operating system object is being created and implemented, right? Whenever you're setting up a device, whenever you're configuring the data storage, what you should do at the very first, before anybody else has access to it, is you should disable inheritance from the root drive if it's a Windows system. And you do that by clicking this button. Now, as soon as you do, something weird happens. It asks you, do you want to convert the inherited permissions into explicit permissions on this object? Or do you want to remove all inherited permissions? Now, I would advise you to select the first option, unless you're in a high security environment. If you hit remove all inherited permissions from this object, nobody has access. And if you forget to add yourself before you clear the screen, you can't even get in there, which is kind of awkward. Okay, that's a little bit awkward. You can actually paint yourself into a corner that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert. And what that means, did everybody see what happened here with the inherited from column? Look, what does it say now?
None.
None, right? But it applies to this folder, subfolders and files. So anything I create in here, if I have another directory inside here for each division, and then inside each of the division folders, I have department folders. Inside the department folders, I have team folders. Inside the team folders, I have individual folders. All of that will propagate from this setting if I leave this intact. What I'd like to do is pull this one out. If you're someone, just anybody who's connected or on my system, and you're not authorized on my system, why the hell should you have any access? That's one thing I should do every time we do this, okay? Another thing we should do is take the authenticated users and edit them. If you're on the system and you're authorized to be on the system because you have an account and you've proven your identity with a proper login, then the odds are pretty good. I want you to have access to resources, but that's not necessarily a sign that I want you to be able to modify anything. Because depending on the other subdirectories, I may want you to be able to modify what's in your own user directory or modify what's in your team directory if you're a team leader. It's about the role that you play. What role do you play in the company? And what are you building for your users, right? So if I have company data and I have division data, and then inside each division I have department data, and inside the departments I have teams, and then inside the teams I have individual user directories. I want to think intentionally about when I turn on inheritance or turn it off. Now here's what I mean. I'm going to remove write so that an authenticated user can read and execute, list the contents, and then read the data. If there's software in there, they can look at the application, they can go into the application directories and files, and they can read, okay? Now, I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to select this option, and that replaces all child object permission entries with inheritable permission entries from this object. What that means is that I'm going to take these new settings and I'm going to hit the apply button. And when I do, because this is checked, I'm engaging inheritance again, starting here instead of in the disk level. I'm not starting in the root of the disk. I'm starting inheritance up again at the company data level. So I'm going to hit apply. It says, hey, this will replace explicitly defined permissions on all descendants of this object with inheritable permissions from company data. Do I wish to continue? I'm going to say yes and okay and okay. Now, so what you say? I go into here, let's create, give me the name of a common division for most mid-size or large organizations.
Accounting.
Accounting, right? So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to call that a department, okay? That's a great, I'm going to say accounting is a great department within administration as a division, okay? Are you with me?
Yeah.
So administration, and then inside administration, we're going to have accounting. And then I'm also going to have operations, right? And let's say for administration, I'll tell you what, let's think about the university. We have administration, right? And then we have staff. And then we have faculty. And then who else do we have at a university? What's a major division of users? Would we have staff, faculty, or administration if we didn't have this last category? I'm talking about you.
Yeah,
Students.
students.
Students, right? Students, exactly. Right? And then within students, well, you could have students broken down into different departments by saying, okay, seniors, juniors, sophomores, however you want, right? Or you could say liberal arts students, science and math students, business students, nursing students, right? You could have different departments in there, right? Let's go back to administration though. I want you to see this. If I look at accounting and I go ahead in here and I look at my properties and I look at security and I look at advanced, where am I inheriting these three settings for permissions? Where are
From-
those coming from? Does that look familiar?
Yeah, the company data.
It's inherited from the company data. Yes, excellent. Okay. Yeah, and can I change the permissions at this level? Yeah, I can change permissions. I can, as soon as I do that, I can disable inheritance, right? I can change permissions. Then I can disable inheritance. And then I could intentionally set up different permissions at this level, at the accounting level. Now, I want you to see something that's pretty dramatic, right? So inside accounting, I want to create a department. And we'll call it, I'll create a role called accounts payable. And then I'll include a department called accounts receivable. Now, in classic business terms, accounts receivable are the staff that receive payments from other people. The customers. They're the people that deal with the customers. Who does a university receive money from?
Clients.
Yeah, well, from financial aid, right? But financial aid doesn't happen unless the students, the customers of the university are the students, right? So the staff in accounting, right, in the business office that receive money from students, you would call those accounts receivable staff, right? Accounts payable are the ones that pay money out to organizations and businesses that serve the university. So we have a bookstore, we have publishers that provide books, and we have to pay for those before we put them in the bookstore. We have food in the cafeteria, we have to pay the food supply people who come with the truck that deliver the food to the cafeteria before they prepare it for students to eat, right? Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Now you also have payroll. So you have your own internal customers. I'm going to say payroll, right? University has people who are paid. The staff and the faculty are paid, right? So that's the money going out, and that actually belongs inside accounts payable. Now, let's go a little further, okay? I'm going to move that into accounts payable. I'm going to call these vendors, right? So the vendors of the university or the suppliers, vendors and suppliers, right? Suppliers, vendors. How does the university get diesel oil for its generators? Well, it goes to a vendor or a supplier of diesel fuel, right? So they call up somebody and basically a big truck comes. So there's money going out. Accounts payable means money's going out and money's coming in. All right. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about here?
Yeah.
Okay. Now watch what happens if I go back to company data. And let's go back into here, into security. And let's say that at the company data level, I have somebody who doesn't understand how inheritance works, and they do this. They say, wait a minute, there's no inheritance here. And they don't understand what that means. So they hit enable inheritance. That's all they do. Everybody see what happened there? One click at company data, and now it's changed to disable inheritance. So I've actually enabled inheritance. That's why it changed. I clicked when it said enable. Now it's saying disable. I'm going to hit apply. It's going to say, wait a minute, an error occurred, failed to enumerate. You're going to say continue, continue, continue. Okay. What do you think just happened? If I go into the properties, oh, look at this. Does this look familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's messy. Those permissions are back in. Where did it get them from? The root of the D drive. All it took was one click, but that's not all that happened. Watch this. I'm going to go all the way in. All the way in. Okay. I haven't received those changes because I didn't check one other box, right? It's really good to understand how these controls work. I'm going to go back into properties. I'm going to go back into security, into the advanced options. And I mean, do I need two different authenticated user entries here? One that says read and execute and one that says modify. I'm going to remove them so they look like they were before, right? This is what it was like before. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
So I hit enabled inheritance, and then I hit apply, and it pulled down the previous settings for security from the root of the disk. Now, if I were to go ahead and say, if I hit enable inheritance and then replace all, and then I hit apply, and it says, do you wish to continue? And I say yes, right? What happens now is that I go into here, and if I look inside security, those settings still haven't pushed down into the subdirectories, right? So what we're saying is when you first start out and you set up the directories, if you do it the right way, somebody, a hacker, can try to make a change at the very top, and they can put the original settings back in so that they can have at the data. They click that inheritance, enable inheritance, and then they say replace all, right? And when I first created all those other subdirectories, I disabled inheritance and used replace all. And when I said replace all, I disabled inheritance at every single directory level. So when I go into administration and I go into here, all right, yeah, I go into accounting, and then I look at this. Where am I getting these settings from? The object right above it. right? So if I go here to administration, where am I getting these settings from? The parent object, the directory right above it. The point I'm trying to make is that I create a barrier against simple changes if I create my subdirectories correctly in the first place. Okay, if I understand the roles and then I do some simple things at the very beginning. Once again, I disabled inheritance. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to change this. It says this folder, subfolders, and files. I'm going to check this box. And I'm going to hit apply. And when I do, all of those changes will push down into all of the subdirectories, including the option about here. I lost my train of thought. Basically, when I hit that and then I try to make other quick changes at the top because I'm a hacker and I just want to take over everything. With each directory level, the change doesn't apply because I had inheritance turned on at the right level. And then I checked the other box to enable the settings to pass on to all the child objects. So literally, I've made life very difficult for a hacker who wants to start at the beginning and work their way down to try to gain access, right? They're going to change the access control so that they can make changes to things. The important takeaway here is if you don't practice and understand exactly how inheritance works, and this one box right here, replace all child object permissions. If you don't understand how to block inheritance from above and then enable inheritance from that point down, from a main directory to a subdirectory to a sub-subdirectory, then the changes you want to preserve aren't going to hold fast. What you've seen here is a best practice where inheritance is set at the right level, and then at each level underneath that, you make adjustments from there. You disable inheritance from above and select replace all child object permission entries with inheritable permission entries. And then from this level on down, you have different permissions. So you get good permissions in place overall, and then you refine the permissions for each of the divisions, and then refine further for each department, and then refine further for each user, right? And as long as you get this combination correct, it's very hard for somebody to come in behind at the top, change two settings, and then have their way with everything. The bigger problem is that when people are changing, if they're creating file system resources on servers, they don't take the time to think about how to set up permissions and privileges with inheritance intentionally. Are there any questions about what we've covered today?
No.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording. Please finish your assignment and the assessment if you haven't done so already. They have to be done by the start of class on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.